Salim, what we're facing with the response to the coronavirus is an unprecedented intrusion into the economy. We've never seen the like before. And it is going to throw us into one of the longest recessions, and it will take us a very long time to get out of it. Many people will never be able to recover from the actions of what our premiers and our prime minister is doing by closing businesses. Many will go bankrupt. Many will turn to government for their largesse and welfare, whether it's the $2,000 a month welfare over the next few months or a permanent situation. And the thing is that I believe that this was unnecessary. This kind of thing is, well, not just unnecessary, it's a complete violation of our rights to our liberty, to our property, to freedom of association, to basically every individual right we possess is being violated with the response from our governments. And in my mind, it's going to be impossible to recover from it for some and a very long time for others. Maxime Bernier has just put out a series of videos highlighting the fact that the Bank of Canada is spending upwards of $200 billion just printing money, buying provincial and federal bonds to fund the largesse that they're coming out with. And he's quite right when he says that such a massive printing of money is going to devalue our currency and make it even harder for us to recover. So if you could give us your thoughts on the economy, where we're headed, because you're a political scientist, but as we discussed before, that started off with political economy, the way it was used to be called when you were studying. And so you know quite a bit about economics as the university professor in political science. So give us your expertise, Salim, on what the governments are doing, where it's going to lead us.
Well, very quickly, yes. I mean, this is totally unprecedented situation we are in. However we want to describe it, President Trump has described it as we are at a state of war against an invisible enemy, the microbe. The corollary of that question is who launched the microbe, who launched the invisible enemy. And these will be a matter of prolonged, long discussion, maybe for the rest of this century when both of us are long gone. Our children and grandchildren will be looking back at this period and will try to both understand and explain what happened and what hit them, because they will be carrying the burden as much as we, the living, what remain of us and of our time. The last Great Depression, it is called the Great Depression, hit us in 1929. 1929-30 was when the Western economies tanked. That is 90 years ago. And the memory of that is way behind us now. But the lessons in the sense of what followed is also with us. I mean, what followed after the Great Depression in terms of recovery, well, it was liquid quantitative easing, which has now become the common word in the discussion, which basically means not only printing money but making credit easy and getting the juice of an economy going and not get stuck. In the Great Depression, there was a collapse of demand because people didn't have the resources, and that led to unemployment, massive unemployment, shrinking of the economy. And the question was, how do you get out of it? And so on the economic side, the question was to get the Federal Reserve in the United States, it happened in Canada, release more liquidity, which is what the playbook we are seeing at play right now, and then create projects in the United States. It was work projects that were created to soak up the unemployment, to get the people back in some sort of work, even if it was just tokenism, back on work and out of the breadline in that sense. But then came the war within the decade, within a matter of 5, 6 years came the war, and war was the engine of recovery, ironically. And then after the war came the boom. At least in North America, United States and Canada, we were unaffected by the physical destruction of the war, as was Europe and Japan and the Asian countries. So again, North America was in that sense saved by the two oceans, and the war was not brought into this continent. And so we became the engine of growth for the rest of the world, and particularly the United States. And it was the main engine that drove. The engine of driving the economy for growth had many different aspects to it, but one of the most notable aspects was the Marshall Fund that the America pumped into the European economy to get the European economy going. That is, to provide the liquidity, the aid, and assistance to get the European economy ramped up very quickly. And within a matter of 15 years, Europe was back on its feet, at least Western Europe was back on its feet. So that's the background, Robert, that we have, in a sense, the map, and the only playbook we have. If this is a unique event, and it is a unique event, then the question will be, going forward into the future, how much is the past record, the past playbook has relevance to our time? Because the critical question here that is different from the Great Depression and then this sort of recovery, the war, and United States with Canada becoming the main engine of growth for the world economy, in that sense, at least the free world economy, the capitalist economy, the market economy, was that the United States and Canada was unaffected by the actual destruction of the war. That is, the enemy, in this case, Japan and Germany, the Nazi Germany, Third Reich, and imperialist Japan did not affect Canada and United States physically. But with this invisible enemy, Robert, the microbe, we are all affected. And it is devastating if you look at the figures, and it is even more devastating as you just began, and I hope we carry on this conversation. It is so urgent and important looking forward into when we come out of this lockdown, this shutdown of the economy. But at this time, with the shutdown of the economy, the global economy is shut down. It is not simply, us, Canada, or the United States. The global economy is shut down. And the figures are, as of this morning, as I was looking at them, is, mind-boggling. It is 1 month since the shutdown took place, a little over 1 month, say March 15, the Ides of March. And we are on the fifth week of the shutdown. And in this 1 month, a little over 1 month, for instance, the Canadian economy has lost 10% of the GDP, according to Statistic Canada. 9%, I'm just, rounding off the figure, 10% of the GDP. So if at a monthly rate is going to be 10% of the GDP loss, you can quickly figure out that if we carry on this lockdown, how quickly the numbers will escalate. 10% of the GDP, to put it in numbers, Canadian economy is about $1.7 trillion. So 10% of the GDP loss is $170 billion. 3 months, a third of the GDP will be lost. $170 billion. Canada, again, a federation, 10 provinces and territories. The largest economy in this federation is, of course, Ontario. So if you put $170 billion loss in the Canadian economy, GDP, in 1 month, Ontario has taken the biggest hit in the sense of numbers. So we would be about a third of that $170 billion, $50 billion loss in Ontario's economy. That is, putting it in numbers. But what does that mean in terms of people? What does it mean in terms of businesses? What does it mean in terms of the way we live and the effect of this immense hit that we have faced? In the American economy, it is computed that already the American economy has lost approximately, 15 to 20% of its GDP. So at $20 trillion plus, you can quickly do the computation, is between $4 and $6 trillion gone down. And then the quantitative easing, that is the supply of money that has been created, to get the people have some sort of an income when they have been shut down, when they are not going to work, when businesses are running into bankruptcy. So the Americans had a week ago, 10 days ago, a package that was put through that was about $2.6 trillion package that President Trump pushed through, or rather the Congress pushed through. President Trump signed on to it. And there is signal that more will be coming down. So what Maxime Bernier is talking about, $200 billion is again in the same ratio, in the same range, approximately, not quite, to what the Americans have done. Eurozone this morning was reporting that 1/3 of Eurozone is gone. That is, only Eurozone is functioning at 2/3 of its economic level, its GDP. Eurozone GDP is about $18 trillion. So in about 5 weeks, Eurozone has lost something like $6 trillion. These are massive, massive numbers we're looking at a very short time. And so on the one side is loss, on the other side is going to be as a result of the money supply that is being released rapidly into the economy to pick up the slack, will have its effect that we're going to be faced downstream, and which is massive inflationary pressure, because with the economy shut down, there is no production. And so it is simple economics 101. Too much money chasing too few goods, and that leads to massive inflationary pressure. And so we are in a big soup.
The dilemma that I see is that businessmen, and I was one myself, their businesses are being destroyed because of the policies of government. They're told not to produce, they're told to go home. They're told to lay off their employees, to shut their doors, even though they still have bills to pay, so therefore they will be using their savings to pay those bills and eventually probably go bankrupt. Never to be seen again, at least not in the same form. And so here you have myself, who would rather not touch government money or government handouts, but I'm thinking that since the government is to blame, then these people are entitled to this largesse, this welfare money, this $2,000 a month for workers and $40,000 bank loans for business, etc. And that's the dilemma, is that you once had free people, independent people, now turning to government because government has destroyed their livelihoods. But it's all Keynesianism, isn't it? It's all John Maynard Keynes coming out here, printing money, spending money. The people in the front line of that money will certainly benefit, but people like you and me and the whole population eventually will pay the price of a diminished dollar, diminished spending power. How long do you think it'll take for us to get out of this?
Well, I think, in the short term, you can write off 2020. And then looking at the long term, it'll take several years to get back to where we were at the end of 2019, and the question will be getting back to where we were. We are talking now purely numbers, getting back to where we were in 2019. In what shape are we going to emerge back into 2019? We're looking into, I'm reminded of that movie from my undergraduate years. I think I was at school at that time. Back to the Future. Remember that movie?
I do, yes. 1985, I think.
Something like that, yeah. So I'm laughing in the sense of we must have some sense of humor in this very dark times that we are in. But that's what we are. We are going to be moving forward, trying to go back to the future. The future is back. It's not forward. and what sort of world will we be entering in our version of 2019 that we left behind with this Wuhan virus. So yes, I think the whole issue about recovery will be the one that we are faced with, the challenge, and the question that we as Canadians will have to ask is the government in Ottawa in any way, shape, and form, intellectually, in terms of their own political inclination, their ideological fixation, their globalist agenda, are they in any way, shape, or form uh, prepared or have the capability to provide the leadership for recovery? Remember the recovery that happened in the case of the Great Depression, followed by war, and then the boom that came, which is where all the baby boomer generation came into this world. And you and I are, in that sense, the baby boomer generation uh, after the war. There was leadership. There was a great leadership, compared to where we are right now. In Canada, we had people like Mackenzie King, Prime Minister. We had Louis Saint Laurent after him, John Diefenbaker. Despite all of the problems, we're not going to get into that, but there was that sense of patriotism and there was that sense of leadership. I don't think we have that now.
Speaking of leadership, Salim, speaking of leadership and the lack of it here in Canada, especially with Justin Trudeau, the likes of that fella and his cohorts, in the United States, we've seen President Trump, do things that other leaders aren't doing, and that is he is dramatically reducing regulations. He is leaving the choice of whether or not to close businesses or lock down your cities to the states and to the local people, because the United States is, of course, a very vast country, and the situation is different in Georgia, for example, than it is in New York. And that's something that we're not seeing so much of in Canada, with a very centralized, authoritarian, globalist, as you say, leader and leadership, probably trying to make hay over this this problem, this dilemma. And I don't think that we're going to learn the lessons that the Americans are learning, which is that in order to do this, you have to deregulate. You have to leave the decisions to the local people. Here we are supposedly in a confederation of provinces where things like healthcare are provincial. It's in our constitution, it's provincial, and yet we have a federal government and this Dr. Tam and health minister who doesn't have any experience whatsoever in healthcare. She was a graphic designer, I understand, Haidu. And they're seemingly taking the control out of the realm of the provinces. What do you think of that?
Well, this is a very fascinating and yet very challenging and important issue that you're pointing out to. And my views are similar to what is happening in the United States under President Trump's leadership. I might, before I just go into that, I might say as a point of emphasis that the Americans are very lucky that they have President Trump in office as the leader at this time. Why? Because you need a businessman in this sense, the man who knows risk, the man who knows collateral damage, the man who knows people, who understand what it takes to invest, to take risk, and then to make a project work, a business enterprise work, and President Trump has gone through the entire cycle in his life, and he has demonstrated that in the 3 years before this Wuhan virus hit the economy, what it takes to build the economy, and the figures of the last 3.5 years have been the most impressive. There has been nothing like this. I mean, for instance, just while the Wuhan virus was going global, and President Trump has shut down the travel from China on January the 31st. Just one number I cite. Um, on the State of the Union address, which he was delivering on February the 3rd, while the Democrats were busy trying to impeach him all of December and all of January. He pointed out in the State of the Union address that his administration had created 7 million new jobs, that the employment was down to, or unemployment was down to under 4%, around about 3.5%, which by economic textbook means full employment. So that was the man who had brought the United States into that situation within a matter of 3 years with his hand behind his back tied up by the Democrats and the mainstream media, has the know-how, has the leadership to bring back the recovery, and he's going to do that. And one of the ways he's going to do that, which we can see and which you have alluded to, is contrary to all expectation, and which has been the fake news story right from the moment he stepped into the White House, that what you're seeing is a dictator. President Trump has been trying to restore the workings of the American Constitution. He has, tried to get the two branches of the Congress take their responsibility, try to get the governors and the states take their responsibility. And he, as the president, using what is the powers of the chief executive as provided by the Constitution, using those powers, and in this, you can see that at this time, this is where he is moving. America is a federation. It is a republic made of 50 states. Each state is constitutionally responsible for running their state according to their law, that is, the state laws that they have the right to make. And the governor is the chief executive, and the state assembly is the legislature. And the whole idea of that in the American Republic, and by the way, that's also in our situation, but in a different sense, is that one size doesn't fit all. The states have responsibility to do their own innovation, to apply their own methods, to meet their own challenges. And so one size doesn't fit all. And the American Republic, at least in the last decade or so, has become very clearly defined in terms of the colors: red states and blue states. Red states, with Republican governors, which is more oriented to free market principles, which are more oriented to taking responsibility, individual freedom, etc., within the Constitution. And the blue states, more and more centralized, more and more domineering, more and more directive, in the sense that the government will take the responsibility in diverting or driving the economy. And so here you have the situation. I mean, the lockdown that President brought about was not an order that was imposed from Washington and the federal government, in this case, he as the commander-in-chief and chief executive, on all 50 states. He laid down the condition for the lockdown and said now it is up to the governors to follow those conditions, and to work together. He then brought together the private and the public sector to cooperate. He did not close off the private sector. In fact, he's been encouraging the private sector to take the lead in meeting the demands. So now, as he is basically signaled last week, he laid down the three conditions for opening up the economy, and he's asked the governors to see to it that as they open the economy, those three conditions are met, the proper, slow process in which physical or social distance is maintained, so that, the curve is flattened and doesn't again peak up. To define what are the essential and non-essential services, and begin with the essential services and let them go into full speed, and then get the non-essential services going get the schools and universities and colleges up and running. So it will be left to then, those are the three conditions that he has said. It will be left to each of the states, each of the governors in the states to now make the decision. And we know from the news that we have, that all of the states did not go into a lockdown. For instance, take the example, South Dakota never went into a lockdown. The South Dakota governor and the assembly said that here are the conditions, here are the dangers and the peril of coronavirus. And it is the responsibility for all of us as citizens of South Dakota to see to it that we, be prudent, take care, and then carry on our life, in as normal a way as possible. And so, for instance, the restaurant business, which is again the small business, the heart of an economy, the restaurant travel business, they maintained the restaurants, the cafes, the hotels open, but they also maintained the proper CDC guideline of social distancing and so on and so forth. So each of the South Dakotans were then, in that sense, being responsible citizen, and there was no snitching going on and so on and so forth. Texas has begun opening up their economy as of last week. Florida has done that. They have opened up their economy again gradually. Georgia did that, this week. But then you have the blue states, and you have the blue state clamping down, as in Michigan, our next door neighbor. It is almost, nothing will move unless the governor Whitmer says what can move. You can smoke grass, but you can't cut grass in your back lawn.
I think it was Donald Trump correctly called her Gretchen Half Whitmer.
Yeah, exactly. And the same thing is in New York, and the same thing is in New Jersey. So the red states are going with the more massive isolation and quarantine, and they're going to extend it as far as it is possible. And the question you might ask, I mean, we are not talking about America, but there is a learning experience over here for us in Canada. The question you might ask, why is this so? Why is it that New York is behaving in a manner Governor Cuomo is insisting to keep the lockdown tight? Mayor de Blasio of the largest American city, New York, is gone now public with his demand for the citizens of New York, each of them to become a snitch for the government, for the city government, take pictures, send it off, set up a line, and the police will be immediately there to see to it that, you don't have too many guests in your house, you don't know how to have a party, a birthday party, or you don't go out in your backyard with your 5-year-old son and play a game of basketball. This is the sort of lockdown that New York is practicing, as opposed to what I just mentioned about South Dakota. And it then goes down to the heart of the problem. This has got very little to do with coronavirus. It's got everything to do, in that sense, with the impulse and the attitude of a red state governor and their politics, as opposed to a blue state governor, their attitude and their politics, that one is showing the respect for individual freedom and responsibility, and the other is the big nanny state, constricting freedom, constricting the individual. And it is in the contrast of those two things, I think, that the public in America is going to make their own decision going forward in terms of electorally and in terms of, where they stand. We can already see that in Michigan, for instance, over this weekend, there was mass protests going on in Lansing, Michigan, that is the state capital. There have been, people come out and protest in just about every blue state, in Virginia, in Maryland. They have come out. These are all blue states. They have come out in protests, So we will see this grow immensely. So
That's
the question will
interesting.
be, and I think the question the people will answer by their action is, Why this sort of attitude? And the answer is not too difficult. In a time of crisis like this, the impulse on the part of people in government and in authority is to concentrate power.
We see here in Canada, with our supposed conservative premiers, especially Jason Kenney in Alberta and Doug Ford here in Ontario, we've seen these so-called conservative leaders be extremely autocratic, extremely dictatorial, with very strict measures for the lockdown. Alberta has just recently passed, what was it, Bill 10, which basically gave the ministers there the power to create laws without parliamentary oversight. And people are just like shaking their heads that somebody like a Jason Kenney, who up until he got power in Alberta was preaching conservatism and pro-business and pro-freedom, and people really like the guy. And now, when he's in power, faced with the crisis, he becomes a dictator. It's very different in Canada from what we see in the United States with the red states like opening up their businesses, and the blue states, for example, Michigan, with Whitmer being extremely dictatorial and authoritarian. Here in Canada, it seems like all we know is authoritarianism.
Yeah, I mean, coming back to whether it's Jason Kenney in Edmonton, Alberta, whether it is Doug Ford in Queen's Park, Ontario, and they are the conservative prime ministers, as you say, or in case of Doug Ford, still progressive conservative.
Very much.
They are in President Trump's language, all fake conservative. It is, when the rubber hits the road, then you can find out who is real and who is not real. And the rubber has hit the road in this crisis. And we can see that there is nobody in the Ottawa at the moment that has thoughts and concerns and consideration about what this action that they have done, both at the federal level and at the provincial level, does to the meaning of our constitution in terms of rights and freedom. We are in that sense a country that leans most of the time to the left, to the authoritarian mode. This is the time, again, in the larger sense, you began with calling me or labeling me political scientist or, political economist. To me, these are all ultimately simply labeled, It is like trying to draw a line on a running water. We're talking about human beings. We're talking economy is about people, Politics is about people. And you cannot just compartmentalize any of these subject matter. So none of these people are in that sense disposed to, in that great sense of balance between freedom and order, leaning towards freedom while seeking to maintain order, that is constitutional order. The whole meaning of a classical liberal democracy is ordered liberty. It is not anarchism. That would be the libertarian argument. Do away with government. But no, we do recognize the role of the government. And in a time of crisis, the Great Depression, with which I began, when overnight you're just wiped out, then, whatever is your political philosophy, my political philosophy, and we want to cling and hang on to it, the first instinct is we need help. And you go to the place where you expect help. That's why there is a government, and a democratic government is a government that has been brought about to the consent of the people. So you go there expecting help, and so the government is obliged in that sense to provide for that assistance. But then also the government is there, that hopefully, if it is a government that has the understanding of what you and I are talking about, and we talk about so often, that is freedom, that is in the rush for providing assistance, so you don't crush freedom. And again, Robert, we began this discussion, this video chats more than a month ago. In the very first bolt of this invisible enemy struck us, and you will recall, both of us. I talked about that the cure cannot be worse than the disease, and that meant precisely cure must be to restore us back to our freedom, not to take away our freedom. And so what you are pointing out is that our governments, Jason Kenney or Doug Ford, and of course Justin Trudeau, surrounded by the NDP and the Green, and in this case, the Conservative Party, for them, this is Rahm Emanuel's axiom: don't let a crisis go to waste. So, they're pushing for more control over the lives of the people rather than finding a way that, we're going to bridge the troubled waters. But it is about that you come out, once you've crossed the troubled water, you bridged it and you come out of it, that the freedom are not curtailed and constricted. And so I would argue, if I had the ear of these people, that this is the time to restore the balance of federal provincial government. It is not one size fits all. The demand for Prince Edward Island, a small little island with whatever the population is, roughly, less than 500,000 people, which would squeeze into Toronto and would get lost. The demands for Prince Edward Island is not the same as the demand for the GTA and Toronto, or as is the demand for Alberta and the Prairie provinces. And, the numbers speak for that. And if I may have another couple of minutes, the numbers of this coronavirus victim, the case study, this morning figure from the John Hopkins running chart of it, the global figure, Robert, is 2.5 million confirmed cases, 2,515,000 to be clear. If I round it off, 2,516,000 to be clear, is the confirmed cases globally in a population of 8 billion people. So again, it is a minuscule number, without in any way undermining the lethality of and the toxicity of the Wuhan virus. But I'm putting it in the global picture. 2.5 million people is a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of 1%.
Just to bring it home, Salim, before you continue, in Canada, the government's own website tells us that in any flu season, February, March, 3,500 people die of the flu, the regular flu. To date, here we have over 3 months of the coronavirus in Canada, and to date, only half that number have died from the coronavirus, about 1,700. That puts it in perspective.
Yeah, exactly. The figure that I have in front of me is about 1,730 to be precise, and half of that is in Quebec and Ontario.
Yes.
So Ontario figures of casualty, death is under 1,940, 939. Sorry, that is Quebec figure, and Ontario figure is 624. You add it up, that's almost, that's 1,500 plus, and the total Canadian figure is 1,700. So 200 in the rest of the provinces. So the point I was driving at is now when you do the analysis of these figures, one question immediately comes to mind is how many of these casualties, the deaths, are people who died with COVID, and how many are people who died of COVID? There's profound difference between the two, and that applies in the United States. So these figures are also, the numbers are also numbers with big question marks to it. Again, in the case of Ontario and Quebec, it is similar to the case of New York and New Jersey. New York and New Jersey are the two states that is about 50% of American casualties. You know, the American figures are, as of this morning, a little over 43,000 dead. And New York has about 19,000, and New Jersey has about 4,500. So that's close to 50%. And so when you analyze that, this is where the metropolitan number comes in. You know, I mean, when people talk about social distancing and physical distancing, well, it is in New York, the subway riders, the apartment dwellers, the people living in proximate to each other. And the question then for the blue state governors and the blue state proponents like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is, you guys built New York to be a racist state because you guys have the largest casualty figures. You are the blue state. You are the proud Democrats. You know, you have elected repeatedly Democratic governors and Democratic mayors and Democratic congressmen and congresswomen. And here is your result. It is not in South Dakota. It is not in Nebraska. It is not in, you know, in the red state. So they don't have an argument. They can, all they can say is President Trump is racist, but it is their politics that is at stake. You know, it is they who have created this situation. If there is a situation in which the people are to be held culpable, then it is again the large metropolitan center with Mayor de Blasio, or in our case, Toronto with Mayor John Tory, and in Montreal similarly. These are people living in packed apartment buildings, using packed subways, going into packed downtown shopping, if there is downtown shopping available, and that's where the problem lies.
So what you're saying at the end of the day is that Canada, if not the rest of the world, can learn from President Trump's example that the best way to deal with the response is to have it local. Local is better than one size fits all.
Yes, not only that, I would add to that what President Trump's response has been in terms of not consolidating or controlling or taking away from the states and from the mayors their responsibility and concentrating it in Washington, which is what an Obama would have done, you know, because that's what he ran the country based upon executive orders, you know, top down. I mean, Obamacare, his universal medical care system, the reason it collapsed is precisely it was top down instead of bottom up, meeting the needs of the people given the immense variety and differences in a 50 state republic. Same with Canada. But the federal provincial relationship, in the case of America, federalism is also about freedom. Federalism means freedom. A unitary state is just the opposite in that sense, you know, comparatively speaking, because then it is top down. A unitary state is what is decided by the government, which is a one government at the center, and it dictates the authority. A federation, by definition, is therefore a meaning of freedom. A federal state, in fact, you know, demands in its operation the grease in a federal wheel is freedom. The freedom of the provinces to innovate, to take responsibility, the freedom of the mayors to decide what is important locally. Here I am living in London, and our city hall and our mayor's office and our local municipal government has turned this city of ours into another snitch city, a shutdown city, you know. So there it is. I mean, he has to be held responsible. But if the city of London and the majority of the people in London are happy with that, well, then, you know, it is our culture then. The culture of Canada, the culture of Ontario, the culture of London, that is leaning more and more and more to the left, and that, you know, we prefer a nanny state, a state that provides from cradle to grave, rather than a state whether at the municipal level, at the provincial level, and at the federal level, they say, we respect you, we respect your intelligence, we respect your capacity to make reasoned decision that is going to be both prudential on your part and that will also be respectful of the others. And that's what we do not have. I mean, we do not have it with Doug Ford. We do not have it with Jason Kenney. And obviously, we do not have it with the Prime Minister.
Thank you once again, Salim.
Thank you.